I'm Howie Lim. This is Money Hacks by the Business Times. Staying on top of your spending may have seemed like an uphill struggle last year and this year as well, as wages have often failed to keep up with the increased cost of living. Making a budget isn't easy, and sticking to one is even worse. Could it be that we need better systems than save more, spend less? Welcome to Money Hacks, a podcast series by the Business Times, where we explore useful financial tips to help you on your money managing and wealth growing journey. I'm Howie Lim. And if you have feedback or an idea for a podcast episode, do get in touch. btpodcasts@sph.com.sg. Helping us figure this out today is Shang Saavedra, financial educator and influencer.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Howie.
Happy to speak to you. So what do you reckon? Which is better, budget cutting in troubled times or growing one's income?
I think that both are important in building up your net worth, but it is easier for most people to start with budget cutting because it can be done right away. You can immediately look at your expenses and say, I don't like this, let's spend less on that. So it's an immediate boost to your net worth. Whereas growing your income is going to take some time, especially if you wish to go for a promotion at work, or even if you want to job search for a new job that can pay more. It might take several months to several years for that to actually come into fruition. But I do think that both are important because there's only so much that you can cut from a budget. Eventually, I think that most people do need to be considering raising their income in order to help build their wealth.
Makes sense. Anything else we should note with regard to one or the other as we try to maybe strike a balance between doing both these things or even considering doing just one because it may be the one we're more comfortable with?
In terms of cons, I think that without proper mindset change and without proper mental health care, when you think about cutting your expenses, for some people, it can lead to senses of deprivation because you're like, I'm doing all of this to reach a goal, but I'm kind of denying myself spending on this or spending on that. And if you are not able to continually keep the end goal of wealth building in mind, I know this is for a very meaningful cause, you might lose yourself along the way, give up, get frustrated. And sometimes when people cut too much, you actually do end up possibly harming your life. Like, for example, there's areas where I don't tend to cut all that much. Healthcare, for example, is one of them. I live in the US where healthcare is, a very significant part of our spending. And perhaps also the quality of the food that you eat, or maybe the relationships that you need to maintain by seeing people. And that can hurt some of your long-term goals. Whereas in income increasing, as long as you enjoy your work or you can tolerate your work and you're getting compensated more for it, I'm all for that because I'm very much a champion of making sure that you get compensated as much as possible for the skill sets and experience that you bring to any job. I don't prefer either method. I think both are hard, but the order that I prefer is cutting expenses first and then increasing income.
Can these two approaches, Shang, of budgeting and growing income be done in tandem then? Or should they? Because it sounds like you're saying one or the other may be too extreme for some.
They can be. It's just that it's much more realistic that you're going to cut your expenses first before your income goes up.
Fair enough. I'm also sensing a lot of navel gazing needed. Wouldn't that just incapacitate one who already has issues getting started or sticking to some kind of plan even more though? We're moving into the realm of, think a hole in the ground, but do nothing.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on the person. It's not so much cutting the budget that can lead to harm. It's how well is your mental health. And I write about this in my book that wealth is a mindset. Because if your brain is not in a healthy zone where it is strong, it knows what to do, it can make these judgment calls between should I do this or should I do that, then it's very easy for one to perhaps take the act of reducing cost to a extreme without realizing that they're harming themselves. Or if you are exhibiting symptoms of anxiety or just going through a lot, then it may be that you could feel overwhelmed and not end up doing anything. And I actually really dive deep into this where I'm like, you have to be in tune with your mental health and recognize that if you are struggling, it's not money that's the problem. It's your mental health that's the root of all of this. And you have to address that, heal your mental health, and then everything else gets a lot better.
Still to come, how much should mental strength factor in personal finance management? And what if you just can't get started? More with finance educator and influencer Shang Saavedra in a moment.
Lens on Singapore is now bigger and better. The same deep dive exploration of socioeconomic and geopolitical issues which impact our lives here in Singapore and the region is now a video podcast. If watching a conversation is your thing, join Claressa Monteiro in monthly conversations about things that matter. Subscribe to the BT Lens On playlist in the podcast tab of the Business Times YouTube channel and start watching today. BT Lens On Singapore, now available in audio and video.
And now, back to Money Hacks from the Business Times.
We're speaking with finance educator Shang Saavedra, who believes that while cutting back expenses is often the first approach to financial management, there's only so much you can reduce before hitting essentials that can't be eliminated. We're also heading into how it may have a lot to do with one's relationship with money. So Shang, there maybe is something to be said about managing finances, strengthening brain health, right? I read a study recently.
They're connected in that if your mental health gets better, your management of finances gets better as well. And if you're managing your finances well and you have excess money, you have savings, then you feel more secure and you feel better and more equipped to take on emergencies and, sudden loss of income in the future.
And in your work, what are you seeing people still doing which concerns you despite all the advice out there?
I mean, we're all human. We can't do things perfectly. I never expect people who receive my coaching or my education to be able to execute exactly steps 1, 2, and 3. What I often see happening is that we assume things to go on as normal. But in recent years, there have been a lot of layoffs in corporate roles, in tech roles in the US, and how my clients and students react to those layoffs can differ. Other shocks, and I wouldn't say that they're necessarily bad things, but they are things that are hard to predict, such as when do you think you're going to have another child? Having a child is one of the biggest changes to one's personal finances that you could experience. And then also another thing that is hard for me to predict are healthcare issues or chronic health issues. So I think in general, most of the people that I teach, I think they understand the connection and the things that they need to do, but having the maturity and the mental strength to go through hard times, that's going to vary person by person.
What would you say is the best approach then to personal finance management? Because it sounds like it'd be best to remove emotions from the whole thing. Maybe use robo-advisors or even fob it off to the professionals. Plus, the global personal financial management tool market size was $2.68 billion in 2023 and set to grow. Lots of tools out there.
I think they're a great way to get started because we almost have to use automation to fight our own human tendencies. It's a human tendency to say, oh, if my bank account says that I have $1,000, then I'm tempted to spend all $1,000. Whereas if you use automation and remove $200 from that to your savings account when you don't see it, then you're more likely to say, oh, I have $800 to spend instead of $1,000. So that's the first automation that I ask most people to consider is automated transfers to savings. Then when it comes to investing, yes, most people are pretty well off by using a robo-advisor, an automated advising software that takes control of their investments, allocates it based on their profile, their goals, and then adjusts it over time. What I like about it is that robo-advisors are essentially algorithms, right? They're equations at the end of the day. They're quote-unquote robots. They don't use emotion as an input, whereas many beginner investors are very likely to let their emotions and their feelings about day-to-day news lead them to make changes. to their portfolio, oftentimes unnecessary changes. And so a robo-advisor can really help fight the human tendency to react over emotionally to current news.
What's the advice to the lazy, the fearful, the full of excuses people, Shang?
Figure out where that fear is coming from. It has a high likelihood of being connected to something that happened in your childhood. Like maybe you saw one example of somebody who tried to manage their finances and then just did all the wrong things, and that really stood out to you, especially if it's a parent. Or maybe you live in a community or you're amongst friends right now who are not very well versed in personal finance, so you don't have an example. And I would say that you have to see approaching and taking charge of your personal finances as a standard part of adulting. It's a skill that you can learn, and it's essential to being an adult because all of us are at the end of the day responsible for our own well-being, much of which is enabled via the money that we make through our income. So it is essential to your survival to manage your personal finances. And when you see it as that essential, then at least get started with something. And there are several ideas in my book for people in different situations for what could be the first thing that you could do to get started.
Shang, thank you for spending time with us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Finance educator and author Shang Saavedra. And don't forget to send us an email if you have feedback or an episode idea. btpodcasts@sph.com.sg. I'm Howie Lim. This has been Money Hacks from the Business Times.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts. Or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.